Okay, now everything's going good. What a mess. Okay, so Audrey's going to give a talk tonight called Knowing Our Abilities. I'll say more about her in a couple seconds. For those of you who have not been to one of these meetings before, this is the Agency and Responsibility Research Group. It's exclusively online. There are no members in the traditional sense, and hence neither membership nor meetings and in-person conferences. All events are open access. All the recordings will be available on the ARRG homepage. Every speaker is volunteering their time in the name of helping to build this community, so I greatly appreciate that. So none of us are being compensated, so I'm very happy that Cadre is willing to do this. ARG is neither affiliated with nor supported by any institutions, including my own. It's an independent enterprise that will hopefully serve as a DIY model for other philosophers who want to start similar groups for their research communities. So far, I only have one other talk planned for this academic year. It's Michael McKenna will be giving a talk in the spring. He's teaching class now at Cadre, so he apologized that he wasn't going to be able to make it.
Hero to me.
And then I'm still flirting with giving a talk of my own, which I've never done either here or for the Flickers of Freedom when I used to run that. But there's some research on free will beliefs that I think people might be interested in. So I may do that this fall. And I've sent out another few invitations, so we'll see who else I can line up for this year. For the meeting tonight, so during the talk, you will not be able to unmute yourselves. I'm gonna I will enable this feature during the Q&A. This is to try to eliminate the Zoom bombing that still happens from time to time. When the talk ends, if you have questions, this is the important thing. Please use the hand icon and then leave your hand raised until the speaker has finished answering your question. Because if you raise your hand and then you ask it and then you unraise your hand, you're going to zip around on the screen and it'll be harder for her and for me to see your face. So if you just make sure you leave your hand raised until Kadri's done with the question. If Kadri doesn't have time to answer your question, please just add it to the chat and I'll make sure that she receives it after the talk. Okay, so Kadri Vihvelin is professor of philosophy at the University of Southern California. She has a long-standing interest in puzzles about free will and freedom of action and has defended controversial claims about both. About free will, she argues that the victim of Frankfurt's counterfactual intervener retains free will despite his counterfactual shackles. About freedom of action, she argues that common sense is right and philosophical orthodoxy wrong. Lewis's time-traveling Tim really cannot kill grandfather. Her book, Causes, Laws, and Free Will, Why Determinism Doesn't Matter, was published in 2013 by Oxford University Press. Her work on topics at the intersection of metaphysics and ethics, including causation, counterfactuals, dispositions, abilities, and the doing, allowing distinction, has appeared in the Journal of Philosophy, Australasian Journal of Philosophy, Philosophical Studies, and Canadian Journal of Philosophy, among others. So please join me in welcoming Kadri to the ARG. Now I'm going to unpin myself. Kadri, give me just 1 second so that you'll be pinned. And now I will quit sharing my screen. You can share yours and we can get started. Thanks again. And sorry for the weirdness and the delay, everybody. That was on me.
Thanks so much.
Of course.
Before I start, I just wanted to say that we have just posted a job, my department, which I think is actually a job that free will philosophers could apply for. We're looking for somebody who does philosophy of AI, but it's going to be very hard to find someone who specializes in that. So it's advertised as applied ethics, philosophy of law, and moral psychology. I'm not on the search committee, but I'll do my best to encourage my colleagues to consult with me. And I would encourage you to, if you know, have graduate students, younger faculty, whatever, to apply.
Great.
Okay.
Jobs are hard to
All
come by
right.
these days, so that's good news.
Yeah. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is a paper that's going to be coming out in an OUP volume on the epistemology of abilities, hence the title. I gave it a couple of months ago to some philosophers in Berlin who mostly work on skills. Very interesting, I'm expecting completely different kinds of questions from you guys. So of course, after Thomas invited me, I pretty much took apart the version of the talk that I had in June, and now I have almost finished putting it back together again. So this is not the paper, it's a kind of long handout. And hopefully it will help you follow if I completely blur out due to lack of sleep. Okay, so my topic today is familiar to all free will people, the kind of ability to do otherwise, which many say we never have if determinism is true. But my bigger project, of course, is a systematic and comprehensive account of all abilities. I've tried this before, but I really won't be saying much I won't even use the word dispositions in this paper. Okay. So quote from Van den Wagen again to focus our attention on the topic. Important choice that confronts you. What's this ability to do otherwise? Well, ability to act intentionally, the kind of ability philosophers call a particular or all inability, as opposed to what's called by many different names, general ability, competence, capability, capacity, skill, or know-how. I think you all know the kind of ability I'm talking about, so I will just skip over this. Now, why this ability? Again, part of this was for the benefit of another group of philosophers. But I just want to say here that it's not because I think our abilities are limited to this kind of ability to act intentionally. I would include among our abilities various abilities to act instinctively, habitually, automatically, or in other so-called unthinking ways. I would also count among abilities various cognitive abilities. So why focus on this now? Because I've come to think that understanding this kind of ability is actually the key to understanding other kinds of abilities. And I think we really do pretty badly need a comprehensive theory of abilities. So free will philosophers have tended to focus on instances of these abilities where something morally significant is at stake. An important choice that confronts you, as Van den Wagen says. But of course, in daily life, we're almost constantly making judgments about who has or who hasn't one of these abilities. My son, at the age of about 3, said correctly that he couldn't go through it, something, I can't remember, a play tunnel, because he was too big. He also correctly inferred that he couldn't do what I just showed him, drawn a circle, because he wasn't yet big like me. Of course, children can get these things wrong too. They tend to think that bigger people can do just about anything, including, as my son said one day, sadly, watching the unrelenting winter rain. Mom, make it stop raining. Anyway, what I want to do today.
Kadri,
Yes.
if you hit the read mode at the top left, it'll make it better, I believe, for us to be able to see it.
Oh,
Do you see
sorry.
that? Do
Okay.
you see that button? Yeah. See if that makes it bigger and clearer.
Oh, because it's pretty small
Unless I
print.
just destroyed your
I
top.
did, and now it went away. Upload pending.
All right.
Okay. Sorry, that's better.
Way to go, Eddie.
Yeah.
And now
I
I
just
can
didn't
see
want
you
to look
guys.
like this on the screen trying to read it.
Okay, now I can
But
see
if it
everybody. I
doesn't
couldn't
work,
see
it
you
doesn't
guys
work.
before, but I have lost the screen. Hang on.
Sorry, do you see
Sorry
the
about
share
that.
screen
I'm
button?
bringing this. There we are. Okay.
Ah,
Look at that. Perfect.
Okay. So, okay, but now I can't make it scroll. All right.
Yeah, I think you may have.
Oh, it's scrolling the other way. Got it. Got it. Okay. So where are we? Okay, so What I'm going to do, I'm going to distinguish three kinds of abilities. My technical terms are deep, narrow, and wide. But I want to argue that they map onto pretty ordinary common sense ways of thinking. And I'll suggest that all three are important and all three tie in with different ways we think about free will. I'll say just enough, I hope, about how these three kinds of abilities are related to one another, so you can see, at least in broad outline, what the systematic theory will look like. I'll say a bit, again, I hope just enough to give a clearer sense of what I meant when I said above that you might not have seen this. I just said this, that it's not, well, where did I say this? Doesn't matter. Oh, here. It's not a mere possibility. I'm not talking about the kind of ability we might refer to when we say, I won the lottery, so you were wrong. I was able to win it. So here, I want to say this. Different literatures talk about things in such different ways. In the free will literature, ability means something so special that lots of philosophers don't even want to use the term. They'll talk about capacities or capabilities or anything other than abilities. But over in different literature, philosophy of language, philosophers think very differently about abilities. And there are more sophisticated accounts around now, much more sophisticated accounts. But there was David Lewis. And I think we need to think about how we respond to his claim, famously made in that time travel paper, that can, and he said, are other words for much the same thing, ability, capacity, power, potentiality, always mean the same thing, compossible with contextually relevant facts. If Lewis is right, it's hard to understand what free will philosophers are arguing about when they take stands on whether the ability to do otherwise is necessary for free will or moral responsibility, or whether it's compatible with determinism. I think Lewis is wrong, and I will explain why. I'm finding the screen gets stuck. Uh-oh. Did it again.
Have no fear. We deal with these things all the time in these.
Okay, hang on. I have to stop share and start again? Is that what happens?
Maybe.
Hang on.
And you can ignore my request as you wish.
I can attest to the virtue of ignoring some of Eddie's requests.
Well, it is easier to read, and I think it's good that you can see it, and now I've even lost my screen. That's great. Hang on. Oh, I am still screen sharing, it says. Okay, now I stopped screen sharing, which I wasn't doing. It's not there. It says I'm screen sharing, but it's in that little window at the top. How do I get it to go down? Thomas, this happened before, remember? You don't know.
You're muted, Thomas.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm not sure. I can't see it from your end, so I'm not sure what the
You might try closing the Word document and reopening it and forget about the read mode.
I just can't do it. I'm too tired. This is really bad. Got this handout that I can't even see.
The other possibility is if you want, you can add it to the chat, and it does mean I'll have to advance it when you're ready to advance it, but I can display it on my end and I
Oh,
can
you
advance
can?
it for you.
Okay.
Yeah. I think
I
I
have to
can.
get back inside it, which is what I'm having trouble doing right now. This is partly because I opened up a new version of Zoom just before I started this talk, and it's looking different, and I just haven't used Zoom since
Yeah, that
the
happens.
pandemic.
That happened to
And
me on the
I'm,
first day of classes. No worries.
I mean, the other option is just to talk through my paper, and then you will have a harder time figuring out what's wrong with it. But I should be able to get back to it. But right now, I can't even get out of Zoom to get back into Word. And why am I blanking out on that? I could close it down and just come back.
Or if you just add you can do it this way. If you just add you can add the document to the chat. Do you know how to do that?
I can't even get into the document right now, which is
Oh no, but
ridiculous.
you won't have to get into it. So if you go to the chat, if you open the chat on your end,
Okay.
and at the very bottom, if you just add a message to everybody, on the third icon is a file. You can just upload your file, and then everyone can open it on their end, and you can just talk through it on your end.
Yeah, the file right now is closed though.
Oh, I
I mean,
see.
it's open, so I can't, I have to get back to it somehow.
I see.
Maybe you're in full screen mode.
I am in full screen mode, yes. Thank you. Exit full screen, that would help. You're absolutely right. Good point. Now, I'm still seeing everyone. Tell me what I need to do. You know what? I'm going to leave the meeting and come back. And I
Okay,
can
no
get it
problem.
back.
That's
That's the
fine. Of course. The virtue of Zoom is everyone can join from everywhere on the planet. The downside is stuff like this happens.
I think there's some lessons about abilities going on here.
Yeah.
Okay, I feel like a total idiot, but
You're good.
it's
I swear
back
this,
on the
this stuff
screen
happens.
now.
There's no worries about anything. I need to I need to make you a host again. So hold on one
Okay,
sec.
but I also saw your email and I'm sorry that I was late and I
No,
thought I was going to be
I
fine.
did that part was on me too. You're just totally fine. No
Okay,
problem.
all right. Listen, I think it'll be easier if I just try to share my screen again and we don't
Okay.
do whatever it was that Eddie suggested.
Yeah,
I
that's
made it a
fine.
little bigger. I
Okay.
just sort of enlarged it and hopefully that will work better and then I can just scroll.
Okay. Yep, you're a
Okay,
co-host. You should be able to share when you're ready.
okay, let's go. Okay, is that any better, people?
Yes.
Okay, good. Should have just done that first. All right, so where we are. Okay, David Lewis, yeah, why he's wrong. And then I'm going to revisit the analysis that everyone loves to hate, the conditional analysis, which was, of course, intended as analysis of the particular ability, and the one I call wide. And I won't defend it as an analysis, but I I'm going to show, though I didn't make it to this version of the handout, how close it got to accounting for the knowledge we actually have of this ability. It came so close to being right. And then I will rather briefly propose a non-reductive but informative analysis of this ability. And finally, I'll conclude with an example of how we can actually know in a particular occasion that a person has a wide ability to do something. So my most general claim right up front is that all abilities are second-order causal property. To have an ability, any ability at a time, is to have some combination of intrinsic first-order properties, some property of your brain and body, which, depending on your location and the properties of your location, would causally explain the successful exercise or manifestation of your ability. Stuff to add. Okay, we'll skip over stuff to add. Okay, some features of the kind of ability that this paper is this talk, which is part of a paper, which is part of probably it will have to be another book, is the beginnings of a systematic theory of. First of all, it's an ability of normal adult human beings. I'm restricting my territory, setting aside for now harder questions about abilities of other kinds of individuals, cats, dogs, aliens, actual or future AI, and perhaps simpler objects like tools. I might be looking at this screen. So it's a de re modal property of a human being. It's one of our properties. It's not just a possibility of any of these relatively well understood kinds. It's not a metaphysical possibility. It's not a nomological possibility, though I think abilities do entail nomological possibilities. I think we're only able to do what is compossible with the actual laws. It's not a technological possibility. It's not just a matter of its being possible, consistent with facts about technology. It's not a human possibility, where human possibilities are roughly those possibilities that are compossible with facts about human beings. I'll get to that in a moment when I explain why David Lewis was wrong. The difference between human abilities and all of these other kinds of relatively well understood possibilities is that abilities are individuating de re modal properties. Not all human beings have the same abilities. The other feature of abilities that I think probably everyone would agree with is that abilities have manifestation conditions, which at least partly individuate them. Most importantly, though, abilities don't automatically or necessarily cease to exist when they aren't being manifested or exercised. There's a difference between having an ability and exercising it. And finally, human abilities, unlike, say, the abilities of God, are typically, in fact, almost never permanent properties. We acquire abilities and we also lose them. Given these facts about abilities, that they may persist when not manifested, but they may also be lost, it follows that we have knowledge of abilities only if we know the difference between someone's not manifesting an ability that she continues to have and that person's losing the ability. And I think this is a fact about abilities that if you think about it, makes sense, but philosophers have not really paid that much attention to it. David Lewis in particular wasn't paying attention to it when, in the middle of that famous paper about time travel, he used this very well-known example that he, Lewis, can speak Finnish, but don't take me to Finland as your interpreter. Meaning, of course, that in contrast to, say, an ape, he, a human being, has, the right kind of physiology to speak Finnish, but he doesn't actually know the language. So in that sense, or given those contextually relevant facts, he can't speak Finnish. So he was understanding the ability claim, the can claim, as a compossible with contextually relevant facts F claim. And if we had understood Lewis to be speaking about what's humanly possible, I think he would have said something true. But given the way we ordinarily talk about abilities, and given these facts about ability that I've written down here, I think what he said was something false. What was true, Lewis, as far as I know, never learned to speak Finnish. So it was never true of Lewis at any time in his life that he was actually able to speak Finnish. What he did have was the ability to learn Finnish, but that's a different ability. Okay. 3 kinds of abilities roughly characterized. I'm just going to call them deep. This is a term I haven't used before. Narrow, those of you who know my work, I have used this term, and wide. The reason I call them thus, you could think of them as abilities from the inside out. I believe deep abilities are probably those abilities other people call competences, capacities, capabilities, skills, know-how, maybe general abilities. I'm sure there's contested territory here, but you could think of them as abilities you don't lose just by falling asleep, and arguably don't lose just because you perhaps temporarily no longer have the physical capacity to exercise them broken limbs. Narrow, this is the hardest to spell out, and I now sort of get why people kept confusing my narrow abilities with the so-called general ones, but I think of them as deep ability plus whatever else is required in terms of intrinsic properties for the possession, not the exercise of the ability. They are more easily lost than deep. You lose a narrow ability by breaking a leg, falling asleep, or acquiring phobia. Wide abilities are the ones that are most easily lost. Think of them as narrow abilities plus what we might call opportunity or friendly surroundings or being in the right place at the right time. How abilities of all 3 kinds, I think, are relevant to different ways of thinking about free will. This comes out nicely if you give your introductory students a free will quiz on the first day of class and you ask them questions like, do you have free will? When did you first acquire free will? Do you have it all the time or some of the time? In contrast to, say, Peter van Inwagen, who thinks free will is just a term of art and has no special meaning, it seems to me that people, when they start thinking about free will, use it in different ways. And I think one way is more or less deep. Free will is moral status, roughly something you're born with and can never lose. It's what makes you special, a human being, a person with moral rights. Narrow, I think this goes with free will as what grounds moral agency and moral responsibility. You don't lose moral status when you fall asleep and become a sleepwalker. You're still somebody with the right not to be killed, but you're no longer acting intentionally and you're no longer morally responsible. Wide, well, that's free will as the so-called particular ability to do otherwise, and it's the free will that's at issue in the traditional pre-Frankfurt debate between compatibilists and incompatibilists. So these abilities are related. To have a wide ability, in my view, is to have a relevant narrow ability, sometimes exactly the same one with the same content. So the wide ability to ride a bike, you could also have the narrow ability to ride a bike. You'd lose the wide ability if no bike is available, but not the narrow. But there also may be differences with respect to content, which I'll get to in a minute. But always, in my view, to have a wide ability is to have some relevant narrow ability. And to have a narrow ability is to have some relevant deep ability, but the entailments don't go in the other direction. In earlier work, I distinguished narrow from wide by saying that narrow abilities are those abilities that you gain or lose only by changing with respect to intrinsic properties, whereas wide abilities can be gained or lost without any intrinsic change, as in a Frankfurt case. But this isn't quite right. It's not right because deep abilities are also abilities you may gain or lose only by changing with respect to your intrinsic properties. So the distinction that I thought was a nice, clean, and principled one between narrow and wide is actually a distinction between what we might call surroundings or location-independent abilities, the narrow and the wide ones. The narrow and the deep ones, and abilities we might call surroundings or location-independent, because whether you have them does depend on where you are in physical space. But for now, I'll stick with deep, narrow, and wide. Having noted the distinction, I won't have much to say about deep abilities, except to note that they are distinct from narrow, and to note that philosophers have mostly, maybe entirely, focused attention either on the deep abilities or on the wide ones. I could be wrong about this, but that's the impression that I get. Now, an example of the difference between narrow and wide abilities. I have the wide ability when I'm at home, which is where I am now, to walk to the Ralph's supermarket at Wilshire and Hauser in my neighborhood in 20 minutes. I also have the narrow ability to walk a mile in 20 minutes. It's in virtue of that I have the ability to walk to my local Ralph's. When I'm on campus at USC, 8 miles away, I still have the narrow ability to walk a mile in 20 minutes, but I no longer have the wide ability to walk to my local Ralph's in 20 minutes. It's too far away now. But I have a different wide ability. I have the wide ability to walk to the Ralph's near campus in 20 minutes. So my most general claim, abilities of all three kinds, deep, narrow, and wide, are second order causal properties. To have any of these abilities is to have some combination of intrinsic first properties, which, depending on your location in space and the properties of your surroundings, e.g. the proximity of a Ralph's supermarket, will or would causally explain different successful manifestations of the ability. Why narrow abilities matter? Well, they're the abilities that nobody denies are retained by agents in Frankfurt cases. So even if Frankfurt cases show that a person may be morally responsible while despite lacking any wide particular ability to do otherwise, they don't show that a person may be responsible despite lacking any narrow ability to do otherwise. Why wide abilities matter? Well, pretty obviously, they are abilities to do other than what we do that we take for granted in daily life when we make choices, big or small, but which the consequence argument says are incompatible with determinism. In the past, I've argued that determinism would rob us of neither the narrow nor the wide ability to do otherwise. I'm not going to do that today. I'm not even going to try to defend compatibilism today. My project here is that of taking common sense at face value and seeing what we can learn by examining how we actually think about abilities with these distinctions in hand. It's also an attempt to do what I did before, though I'm not using the words dispositions, but basically going at it from the other direction. One way to think of my earlier work is I started from the inside out. I began with free will as opposed to freedom of action. I thought about the abilities that make it true that we have free will. I called them, I didn't have the term narrow yet, but I called them dispositions or bundles of dispositions. Then later on in my book, I wanted to expand that by saying, oh, we don't just have these kinds of abilities, we also have these other wide abilities. This time, I'm just starting at the other end, and I'm starting from the way we actually think and talk about abilities. So incompatibilists are free to say at the end of the day that whatever you've shown us, this isn't what we're really interested in when we're interested in moral responsibility. That's not the topic for today, but I think it'll be interesting to see what the shape of these abilities are. Okay, let's see. And how bad are we for time, Thomas, given that we were supposed to start an hour
Oh, no,
ago?
the time is, you're fine. Take as much time as you'd like. Everyone's
Oh,
here.
great.
Everyone's here to hear you, and there's no time constraint. We're all just happy to hear what you have to say. So don't worry
Okay.
about the time. Yeah.
Okay. Well, the last time I did this, I had to do it all in 30 minutes. So
Oh,
this
yeah,
time
no, no.
it was 30 minutes and then 10 minutes of comments and about 10 minutes to reply. Okay. So what I am assuming, I'm calling this relatively minimal metaphysics, but I should be open about this. So I just assume, as Van Inwagen did actually in his book, there are laws of nature, independent of scientific knowledge. Laws are discovered, not invented or constructed, but I am nothing I say here commits me to any specific account of the metaphysics of lawhood, to a humane view versus some sort of other view. I do assume that there are mind-independent causal facts, including particular causal facts like striking a mismatch caused its lighting, and including facts about mental physical causation, like my desire to be wide awake this morning caused me to have actually more than 2 cups of coffee. I assume that we have at least some knowledge of causation and laws of nature. And finally, that some counterfactuals have objective truth conditions, the ones associated with causal claims. You could, if you wanted to, and were familiar with it, think along the lines of Lewis's analysis 1. I actually no longer agree with that. You can think about counterfactuals with truth conditions similar to that without miracles, as in the simple theory proposed by Jonathan Bennett back in 1984. You can probably ignore all this if you're not into metaphysics. Some features of the kinds of ability, deep, narrow, wide, abilities to act intentionally, and as well as whatever other kinds of abilities there are, that this paper is the beginnings of a systematic theory of. Hey, sorry, people. I did not have time to reread the handout that I printed out, and I see I already did this, so oh dear, this is bad. Okay, simple conditional, revisited. This part's not written. Okay, so we all know that the simple conditional analysis, which was intended as an analysis of could have done otherwise, the particular all-in, or as I call it, wide ability, is regarded by everybody as having been refuted. And I'm not rejecting that. But I think it's worth considering how really close it came. Suppose we think in terms of how people actually rely on knowledge of, well, let's call them counterfactuals. One of the problems was that at the time the conditional analysis was proposed back in the 60s, people didn't know much about counterfactuals, but just think, even children can do it, how often it's true that our beliefs about I'm able to do this here and now, or just I can do such and such, raise my hand, take another drink of water, sit down, stand up, leave the room. How often this goes together with, if I tried, I would succeed. And how often when you believe you can't do something, you'll think, well, if I tried, I would fail. Right now, restricting our attention to the time just before action. You might say, well, doesn't Lear's red candy case and other cases of pathological conditions, phobias of various sorts, show that these judgments come apart? But actually, I don't think those cases are knockdown counterexamples. There are knockdown counterexamples, but I don't think those are. Just think of it like this. Say you're at a social gathering with your not very nice boss, with your new colleague, you're both new in the job, and there are these homemade red candies that his wife has made, and they're being passed around, and he takes offense very easily, and your friend says, oh dear, I just can't eat those candies. I've got this thing about them. And you say, come on, he'll be really offended. It might affect your next promotion. Just try. And the person says, no, I can't try. And you say, well, if you tried, you might succeed. You never know until you try. And the person says, no, even if I could somehow try, I would still fail. I think this would be a natural way to think about it. If your phobia is so great that you can't try, why believe that if you tried, you would succeed? I am not saying there aren't cases that are counterexamples. The knockdown case, which we'll get to in a minute, is of course the case that Van Enwegen had in his book. Comatose, well, his person was called Smith. I'm going to call mine Comatose Charles. But let's stay off that case for a moment and continue to think about these first-person pre-action judgments. I'm not making any kind of claim about Anscomian practical first-person knowledge, but it does seem that we are often in a good position to know that we are able to do or not do something on the basis of our beliefs about these kinds of counterfactuals. Of course, we can be wrong. I might believe that I can leave this room not knowing that Frankfurt-style intervener has turned up and locked the door. I might now believe if I tried to leave, I would, but my belief would be wrong. But let's just add to my knowledge about the world around me and what I can in this, call it particular, if you like. I'm pretty sure I'm talking about the same notion, ability to leave the room. If we add to that the fact that you are here too, and actually you're in the room too, and you say, well, let's try the door, and you do, and you say, nope, you can't get out, the door is locked. You tried, you failed, and now I believe I can't leave the room because I believe that I too would fail if I tried to open the door. And cases can go in the other direction. I've been a prisoner in my room for a while, but I don't know that this morning the door has finally been opened. So I say, nope, I can't leave the room. If I tried, I'd fail. You tell me, nope, just try. The door is open now. I try, and I change my belief both about what I can or can't do and the counterfactual. Well, what are the other counterexamples? Well, they're the cases of flukish failures and flukish successes. Austin's golfer, skilled golfer who normally can do whatever it is that golfers do, make these easy putts or whatever they are, but doesn't on a particular occasion and says, I could have done it. The novice darts player who gets lucky, the lottery winner who wins and says, I was able to do it. Well, note something about these cases. These are cases where the relevant counterfactual is one about an actual case. The person tried to win the lottery, they succeeded. They got the right ticket. The golfer tried to make the putt, he failed. The novice darts player tried to hit the bullseye, and he actually succeeded. And it's just a fact about the standard semantics for counterfactuals that the actual world is closer to itself than any other world. So if the antecedent of a counterfactual is true, so is the consequent. What to do? In an earlier version of this paper, I toyed with trying to give a non-trivial counterfactual. If you tried again or in a different way, you would succeed. But I'm now thinking, and this is brand new, I know almost nothing about probability, but I think a better way to go is we're just defending the simple conditional analysis now as far as we can, is to say that the relevant beliefs about counterfactuals are just probabilistic beliefs. You believe if you tried, you would have a good enough chance of succeeding, a high enough probability, where how high the probability should be may depend on context. So the reason the novice darts player and the lottery winner weren't able to do what they did through a lucky fluke is they did not have a good enough chance of succeeding. How do we evaluate that? I don't know. I'm not talking about objective chances here. I don't want to get into anything controversial if determinism is true, but I think however we come upon these probability judgments in real life, taking into account relevant information, which will include information about, say, the odds of winning a lottery or one's skill as demonstrated by one's past successes in the activity and so on. Okay. We now get to the paper written quite a few years ago now that caused me to rethink some things about how I thought about ability. A very interesting paper, ultimately wrong, I think, but very interesting, by Jack Spencer, called Able to Do the Impossible. So his claim, and this is the part of the paper that I think he was right about, is that the relationship between abilities and counterfactuals has been misunderstood. The success or failure of counterfactual attempts provides us with evidence of an agent's abilities or inabilities, but he said it's the agent's abilities that explain the relevant counterfactuals. He also argued for a claim that I think is false, that an agent may have the ability to do something that it's metaphysically impossible to do. He had a very, very clever case for that and had to think a little bit about why it was wrong, but I'm not going to talk about that in this paper. I have another paper on that. Okay, so the second claim is wrong. My abilities are not the same as my possibilities, whether metaphysical, nomological, technological, or human, or possibilities restricted in any other sort of way, at least not restricted by fiat, as it were. It's not restricted in the way we restrict possibilities when we say, what's nomologically possible for me is just what I do in some world with the same laws as ours. Some world, the same laws, but maybe very different initial conditions. I'm not saying that, I'm just trying to clarify here. I'm not saying that we don't end up using possible worlds in the end as part of the analysis, but it's going to be in a complicated way. But the relationship between ability and possibility, I believe, does go like this. My abilities are limited by my metaphysical, nomological, and human possibilities. I'm not able to do anything that's metaphysically, nomologically, or humanly impossible. And this fact, and our knowledge of this fact, explains one way that we have lots of evidence of our abilities. We know about the limits of our abilities by some generalizations about what, say, no human being can do. But we don't get knowledge of our abilities in the same way because different human beings differ with respect to their abilities. Okay, the knockdown counterexample to the simple conditional analysis, comatose Charles. So this is my slightly different version of Spencer's example. Charles is a really excellent mathematician, and he was able to prove many theorems, including Fermat's last theorem, which apparently is notoriously difficult. And it has the distinction of being apparently a theorem of which more incorrect proofs have been published than any other, or at least so Wikipedia told me about an hour ago. But let's stipulate that the facts are that even though Charles has unfortunately fallen into a coma, it's true that if he tried to prove Fermat's last theorem, he would succeed. Why? Because if he tried to prove it, he would first have to be conscious. And if he were conscious, he would still have his mathematical skills and he would succeed. So knockdown counterexample to the simple conditional analysis. But here's another case. Consider a snail. If the snail had tried to prove Fermat's last theorem, then, and I just put a question mark there. But the point here, and Spencer doesn't really spell this out, though I guess that was the intention, is that the snail isn't a counterexample. Because even if the snail had a bigger, better brain, good enough to do not just simple arithmetic, but complex mathematics, and even good enough to try to prove the theorem, there's no reason to believe the snail would succeed. It's not a counterexample. But rather, the snail case, in addition to the comatose human being case, makes it easier for us to see the real moral of the case that's a knockdown counterexample, which is that these counterfactuals about the comatose agent and snails, they don't provide evidence of what the agent and the snail are, as he puts it, presently and actually able to do. The versions, as he puts it, of the snail and the comatose person we're considering are just too different to count as evidence for the abilities of the actual snail and the actual comatose guy. Now, I think he's right about this. They aren't evidence, I think, because the counterfactual situations in which Charles and the snail make the attempts, we don't even have to consider the successes, just the attempts, are ones in which they are very different in causally relevant ways from the way they actually are. Charles would have to be conscious, and the snail would have to have a much bigger brain. So the lesson of the cases, I'm saying, are that the relevant counterfactuals are ones that hold fixed, but not by stipulation. See Spencer's case test below. Are these causally relevant properties, the present and actual ones? So no, I didn't stress this enough earlier, and the quote from Tom Cruise movie that was also at the top of the handout was meant to highlight that. There's a point in one of the Mission Impossible movies where Tom Cruise says, "Don't worry, I'll be able to do it when the time comes." Another nice example in contrast to the way Lewis seemed to think about ability, that abilities are tensed. The word can is not. Well, we have could for the past of can, but we don't really have a future could. But with abilities, it's quite natural to say, I will be able, I will have the ability. I don't have it now, but I will. Yes, so that's relevant, but the lesson of the snail and Charles is a bit different. It's not that the snail and Charles would in the future of the attempts, have this ability they don't actually have. It's that in order to even try causally upstream, they would first have to have consciousness or a better brain. Spencer says, however, third counterfactual test, if S remained intrinsically very much the same and the counter circumstances remained very much the same, and S attempted to A, then S would or might succeed. And I'm not sure why he proposed this test. He actually just throws it out on the way to the claim that, we don't even have to use counterfactuals sometimes and go directly to evidence about what other people do. But to me, it looks like a test for narrow ability, or only time I'll say this word, intrinsic disposition, rather than wide ability. It looks like the kind of test that's designed to rule out interference by thinks or masks, by stipulating that the agent and the circumstances remain much the same. But our topic is wide ability. So a better counterfactual test, again, it's just a test, not an analysis for wide ability, is that if the agent tried to do the relevant thing, she would still, at the time of her attempt, be intrinsically very similar to the way she actually is, and she would still then, the time of her attempt, be in surroundings very similar to her actual surroundings, and in that counterfactual scenario, she would or at least might succeed. So the difference between Spencer's counterfactual test and mine is that mine doesn't build it into the antecedent, that S and her surroundings are very similar. It makes it part of the consequent. My test is designed for cases of the snail and comatose Charles kind. They fail the test because if they tried, they would have to be very different even before they begin to try. Charles would have to be conscious. The snail would need a much bigger brain. So better counterfactual test delivers the right verdict about a case that Spencer never considered. I'm calling it Beefy Bill's bad day. Bill has big biceps and normally has no trouble doing 10 chin-ups. But today his unfriendly fairy angel has come on the scene. That's the term that Spencer uses rather than Fink or Mask or Frankfurt intervener. His unfriendly fairy angel has come on the scene and will thwart all his attempts, either by instantly shrinking his biceps or by blowing gusts of wind in a downward direction. Spencer's third counterfactual test gets this case wrong. If Bill remained intrinsically very much the same and his circumstances remained very much the same, he would succeed in doing what he is ordinarily able to do. He would still have the big biceps. He would do the chin-ups. But given the presence of the unfriendly fairy angel, he wouldn't. So I think these cases provide further support for my taxonomy of abilities. Comatose Charles doesn't have the wide ability to prove Fermat's last theorem because he lacks the relevant narrow abilities. He's not conscious, so he isn't able to even try to do simple arithmetic, let alone prove the theorem. The snail doesn't have the wide ability because it's a snail. It lacks the competence, the deep ability to do any kind of arithmetic, let alone the complex mathematics required for Fermat's last theorem. And Beefy Bill doesn't today have the wide ability to do the chin-ups that he has on other days because the unfriendly fairy would either instantly remove his narrow ability by shrinking his biceps or blow gusts of wind, preventing him from exercising his narrow ability. So again, this shows that more is required for wide abilities than is required for narrow abilities. It must be true not only that you have what it intrinsically takes, but that you're able to manifest, exercise that ability in the actual circumstances, in your actual physical location. Okay, so here comes the causal explanatory counterfactual analysis, CEC, I wish I had a nicer name, for the wide ability to intentionally A. Non-reductive, but I think informative analysis, or it will be informative once I have the complete theory of all these abilities. So this says that a person has at a time, the time is important, the wide ability to intentionally A, just in case they have at that time some combination of intrinsic properties, and then there's just two clauses. First, there's the one that we landed up with when we got to our best version of the simple conditional analysis. If S tried to A, S would have a good enough chance of succeeding in doing A. But more has to be true. And if S succeeded in doing A, so now we're considering the scenarios where, the counterfactual scenarios where the person does succeed. And now we're looking to see what the causal explanation of that is. And S counts as having the wide ability only if it's true in that situation that the causal explanation is that it's because S tried and had B, that combination of intrinsic properties, and not because S had at T any narrow abilities. She doesn't actually have a T, and not because her surroundings at T are more favorable to A than the surroundings she is actually in at T. I haven't said anything about why to include surroundings. First, I think I already said the explanation. Yeah, I already said this part. Surroundings. The reason I like using try as the antecedent of the conditional analysis is that try is closer to action than, say, intend. You can intend and never act, as in cases of acrosia, or some other word like decide, choose, or even effectively desire, whatever that means. To try is sometimes and quite often to actually do something. It's not to just sort of have this volition in your head. So the surroundings can be relevant to whether you can try to do something, as I'm reading try. I mean, not always, of course. You can try to move your little finger, not knowing that it's paralyzed simply by doing something only in your head. But consider you're on an airplane. Can you ride a bike? You can't even try to ride a bike on an airplane. You know, you have to have somewhere to put the bike. You have to have the bike, you have to have level ground in which to ride it. So in my view, it will turn out to be true that while you're on the plane, you don't have the wide ability to ride the bike, because if you tried, you would have a good chance in succeeding. But that would be because if you tried, you would be in surroundings more favorable to riding a bike than your present surroundings sitting on the airplane. So that's why that's there as well. Okay, a simple case study. This is just about the end, knowing a wide ability. So we're imagining somebody, oh boy, this is how long ago this part of the paper was written. It was still the pandemic. So what does Susie know as she approaches her bike, intent on taking it for a ride down the nearby bike path? Well, first, she knows that she has the narrow ability. Remember, a location-independent ability to ride bikes. She might say, I rode my bike just yesterday and I'm no different today. No, it wasn't a lucky fluke. I know how to ride a bike. I've been doing it all my life, and I'm as steady in my feet now as I was yesterday. I haven't broken any bones or twisted or sprained my wrists or ankles. And I have a clear head. I'm not drunk or hungover or suffering from any kind of anxiety or panic or sudden phobia about riding. And I took out the part where she also says, and I see that the bike path is open again. We're allowed to ride on the beach. Okay, she's saying that she has evidence of her bike riding skills, what I call her deep ability to ride bikes, on the basis of a long history of past successes, but also on the basis of evidence that she still has the intrinsic properties that suffice for her continued narrow ability. No broken bones, no sudden phobia or anxiety or panic or hangover. Well, but does she have the wide ability to ride the bike? Well, this depends partly on the bike. It's okay, it looks okay, but appearances can be deceptive. Perhaps it was taken for a joyride last night and is now in a highly precarious state, disposed to collapse in response to the trigger of any attempt to ride it. Suppose Susie is with her friend Billy, who hops on her bike before she does, saying, I'll take it for a quick spin, back in a moment. Well, the outcome of Billy's attempt provides Susie with evidence of her present wide ability to ride her bike. Yes, but the way it provides evidence is different, depending on whether and how he succeeds or fails. If his attempt fails because the bike falls to pieces as soon as he tries to ride it, this is evidence that if Susie had got on the bike first and tried to ride it, she too would have failed. The bike is not rideable. If Susie's attempt succeeds, this is evidence that the bike is rideable by a human being of roughly Susie and Billy's size and weight, and therefore evidence that if Susie had tried to ride it, she too would have succeeded. But Billy's successful attempt is evidence for Susie's wide ability only insofar as it's evidence for the truth that is counterfactual about Susie. And it is evidence for the truth of the counterfactual about Susie only because Susie already has evidence of her own narrow ability to ride bikes. If she didn't have this evidence, if, say, her leg was broken, his successful attempt would not count at all, either as evidence for the counterfactual about her or as evidence of her wide ability. Suppose that Susie and Billy each have bikes, which both look okay. But Susie's bike is fragile, exposed to collapse in response to the trigger of any attempt to ride it, and Billy's is not. And suppose that Billy gets on his bike first and successfully rides it. His success provides no evidence for the rideability of Susie's bike or for Susie's wide ability to ride it, because it provides no evidence for the relevant counterfactual about Susie, that if she had tried to ride it, she too would have succeeded. Finally, let's consider a philosopher's version of the story. Susie and Sylvie are exact atom for atom duplicates. And Susie has the same evidence for her narrow bike riding ability as before, and the same visual evidence that her bike is now, as it was yesterday, rideable. Sylvie offers to test Susie's bike, and her bike ride is a success. As in the earlier story, Susie now has excellent evidence that she too would succeed in riding her bike if she tried. It would be rational for Susie to think if Sylvie can do it, so can I. But Susie's bike ride is only evidence, not proof, for the counterfactual about Susie and for Susie's wide ability. If there is an unfriendly counterfactual intervener lurking in the wings, determined to foil Susie's and only Susie's attempt to ride the bike, then Susie's belief is false. For if Susie had tried to ride her bike, she would fail. The unfriendly counterfactual intervener would stop her. If this seems complicated, remember it's not so complicated in real life. In real life, Susie often knows that she has the wide ability to ride her bike because she knows that she has what it takes, intrinsically speaking, to ride it. She knows that the bike has what it takes to be rideable, and she knows that her surroundings provide her with what's required for bike ride. Her knowledge of these facts is causal knowledge. It's knowledge in a rough and ready way of the causally relevant properties of a successful bike ride. There's a lot more to say, but I hope I've said enough to show, at least in broad outline, how to go about giving a systematic account of our abilities, an account that can make sense of our knowledge of our common sense beliefs without denying or presupposing the falsity of determinism. And that's the end of the share.
We're all clapping. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, questions?
Trying to see everyone and I'm not able to. Wait a minute. I'm just trying to get everyone on the screen.
Oh, I know. It's because you're pinned. Give me 1 sec. I'll unpin
Okay,
you.
thanks. Yeah,
Yeah,
because I can only
sorry.
see a few people.
Okay. Eddie's got a question, so let's start with that and we'll see where it goes.
Okay.
Thanks, Kadri. That was really interesting. I guess I don't have your book or papers open in front of me, so I'm really just asking a question about Vihvelin exegesis, which hopefully you're an expert on. And it's basically trying to see where this new account that you're giving differs from the dispositional analyses that you've developed in earlier work, and sort of what the bite is, or what what we're getting from the newer account that we weren't getting from the previous one. If I'm understanding that there is supposed to be sort of a next step you're taking.
Good. It's not, I just didn't use the word disposition. It's the same account from the other direction. And, I made mistakes. I didn't realize that when I characterized narrow abilities, it was taking in this other class. I don't know when I thought of deep abilities a while back. I hadn't developed it, but it's kind of a working out of the same basic idea. Okay. I also realized I've been reading papers by, lots of people now. Barbara Vetter over in Berlin has the Human Ability Center, and she's written a ton of papers. She's got one criticizing me called Our Abilities Dispositions. I've been thinking of a reply called Our Dispositions Abilities. The more I think about it, the word ability is so much part of our common sense talk about all sorts of things. I'm now thinking it's, just as respectable as disposition. So in other words, I never claim that our abilities are conceptually dispositions. Although some people seem to think I made the claim. I said that they have a causal structure that's similar. And I think still there are lots of similarities, but now I'm thinking, let's just start with abilities and especially start with this close to the surface ability to do otherwise. So that's the idea.
Okay. So you're not rejecting dispositional analyses at all. Right? I mean,
Well, the trouble is when I introduced it, it was sort of brand new. Then now there's a huge literature on dispositions, thinks, and masks, etc. Uh, I just don't need to use the word. And
Okay.
maybe it will turn out that there are some interesting differences, but I really think there is an advantage with being able to show that we don't have to get to wide abilities by somehow trying to add on to narrow abilities, that we can get to them in this fairly surface way, because really those are the abilities that we freely talk about, even if at the end of the day, for whatever reason, they won't satisfy some philosophers as being robust enough for whatever, for basic dessert or whatever it is they want. But that's the idea.
Okay. And just another clarification, because it went really quick, and then I don't think you talked much more about it. Can you just remind us what the deep ability is that's
Well, I
different?
haven't thought very much about deep abilities, but I suspect that, it's all in the ballpark of skills, know-how, though I've seen papers where people say skills are not the same as know-how. And, in particular cases, they aren't. Competences, capabilities. But here's how to think about it. You don't lose your ability, your competence to speak a language when you're asleep. It's stored there in your brain, deep inside your brain. Do you lose your ability to ride a bike when you break a leg? No, you still know how to ride a bike, but you can't, in an ordinary sense, ride a bike. So, and I have no idea about general abilities. I have never known what people mean by general abilities. So if anybody wants to tell me.
So Cutter, I'll ask a quick question. This is also clarificatory because I'm just curious. So how do you tie this analysis to like either free will or responsibility or both? Like how do you envision it fitting into your broader project?
Yeah, could I just quote Van in Wagon here? Moral
Sure.
responsibility is a term that has been ruined by philosophers. Look, it depends on what you want. I very briefly said, I do think they can be tied in. Some people just use, I'm not talking about philosophers necessarily, but ordinary people who do have ideas about free will, that, free will is what makes human beings special. AI could never have free will. Free will is what gives us moral status. Babies have moral status, they're not yet morally responsible. That might go with deep abilities, if we enlarge deep abilities to include potential to acquire abilities. Moral responsibility, well, I think philosophers divide on that. A lot of philosophers, I think, are basically saying that moral responsibility is a matter of narrow abilities, even if they don't want to talk about abilities, right? The intrinsic stuff. In order to be responsible for, accountable for something you don't do, something you merely allow to happen, I think you need the wide ability. I don't think we will even correctly use the term allow. Did you allow a child to drown if you didn't have the wide ability to prevent the child's death?
I see. So I have maybe a follow-up question if there aren't any other questions just yet. So take Lewis and his in some sense his ability to speak Finnish. And this is going to be like the slug example, because I think in some sense what we're getting ready to see with AI and brain implants and all that is that it's at least possible that you could learn Finnish in a flash, let's say, in a matrix style downloading of the information. And the only reason I haven't learned it yet is because I have reservations about learning foreign languages in this automatic downloady way. It seems like to me you should learn it in the old fashioned way. But it looks like humans are, in that sense, relative to future iterations of ourselves, like the snail. So we could I could learn German and Finnish all in a flash. And I wonder how you view those sorts of abilities.
Well,
Or not.
we could say there are all sorts of abilities we might have. Ability takes modal and future tense. When this happens, you will have these future abilities. Or you could say there are, existing technology or very soon to be developed technology will give me the ability to acquire these abilities. I don't think I'll take advantage of this ability, you might say. I mean, learning is a matter of acquiring new abilities, right? It might be done slowly the way we do it, or maybe it can be done at lightning speed.
I guess I was thinking in a way that we're not like snails, because AI is not going to make it possible for snails to learn Finnish in a flash.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, I was a bit puzzled by why you brought up the snail, but
Oh, it's more like, because you used the snail example earlier, and the idea, so the idea was like, well, look, snails, if they were smart enough, they could also do Fermat's theorem. And it looks like I'm somehow closer to being able to learn multiple languages in a flash than snails are to doing Fermat's theorem. And it's just a question of how we view those possible capabilities or abilities.
I'm not sure what you're asking, but one thing that I left out of the paper was, do we think of the ability to acquire abilities, especially if we can do it really quickly, as more or less just the same as having an ability? I mean, I didn't answer that question. I mean, if I take off my glasses, I won't be able to read the page that's now a couple of feet away from me. Should we say that at that moment when my glasses aren't on, I don't have the ability? Or should you say that I do have the ability in virtue of the fact that I can so quickly cause myself to read the page? There's some good questions there. I think when we're quite far in the future, we would use the term, I have the ability to learn a language. Because trying to do something is different from trying to learn to do or trying to bring it about that you can do something. But we also don't want to say that I have my eyes closed for a moment. Does that mean I no longer am able to see? All I have to do is open my eyes. I'm not sure if that was your question, but
It was related. It was related. Thank you. I was really just curious how you tied this to some of the stuff you said about the stuff earlier in the talk. Other questions? Tony, yes.
Thank you. Hi, Kadri.
hi.
Good to see you. Thank you. That was fun. So I wonder if you could say a little more about, and I'm not sure exactly how to express this because I was writing it down and I was sort of thinking of it in my terms, and I may have gotten this wrong, but there's it's okay. Here's the way I wanted to put it. The ability modality is not the same as the metaphysical modality. It's not the same as nomological modality. It's not the same as human ability. And so I just sort of I wondered about that. I mean, I'm kind of tempted to say that ability, as you are, is restricted by and formed by nomological possibility. That is, I've got these intrinsic properties, and they explain what I would do if I were to try. So I'm tempted to think that it's the same modality as nomological. So I wonder how you're thinking of them as coming apart.
Are you maybe reading nomologically differently from how I am? Remember, I'm asking, when I say something is nomologically impossible, I'm just referring to something that doesn't happen in any world with our laws, no matter
Right.
how different okay,
Right.
good, we're agreeing. So it's impossible for me to run at the speed of light, to
Right.
walk on water just by, with no help, to fly by just flapping my arms. Those things are impossible. But so I agree with that. I say that our abilities are limited by what's nomologically possible, but it doesn't follow that we have the ability to do
Oh, I
it.
see. Okay.
That's all,
I got it. Right.
right? It's nomologically possible to walk on the moon, but only a few people have done it, and only a few people have had the ability to do it.
Right. Okay.
The right ability.
Okay.
Kristen.
All right, it's been a while since I've been on Zoom, so forgot about the mute. Okay, hi, Kadri.
Hi,
Hi,
Kristen,
everybody.
good to see you.
So I have something I was hoping to just run by you to see if I'm following what's going on. And there are a few new tweaks here to what your view is that I was wondering if you could clarify so that I could use it a little bit more in my work. So like the humanly possible, just some of the things that were just coming up. So so one of the things that I've tried to do with your narrow wide ability distinction is to put pressure on Dirk Perboom's hard incompatibilism. So he's a hard source incompatibilist, and what that means is that he has this. He thinks there's a source condition, rather than an ability to do otherwise condition, and you have to satisfy that in order to be free. And then you look into the details, and what he tells you about the source condition is that only somebody with the ability to override the laws of nature would be in a position to satisfy that that source condition. And so then he tells you a story about, well, look at beings like us humans. We don't seem like we're the kind of beings that have those properties, like the kind that would allow you to override the laws of nature. And that seems to be the case, whether determinism is true or not. So he seems to be committed to the idea that our intrinsic properties are such that a normal human isn't going to be a law overriding, isn't going to have the narrow ability, as you would put it, to override the laws of nature. Hopefully that's right so far. And so then it seems like there might be a problem for Perboom. And it kind of goes like this. Well, if I don't have the narrow ability in any possible world to override the laws of nature, and it has nothing to do with the determinism or
Can I
indeterminism.
just interrupt for a minute? Maybe I haven't kept
Yes.
up with what Dirk's saying. I thought, at least in his earlier writing, he was saying, I'm not an impossibilist. Agent
Yeah.
causation is just empirically unlikely, but it's possible. Is he saying
Yeah,
something
so
different now?
well, the way I don't think he is exactly clear on just where I need him to be clear. So I think there's a couple different options to interpret him. But it does seem like he thinks that we aren't the kind of beings as we are to be in a position to exercise this law overriding ability, even though he grants that some metaphysically possible being out there could, right? So there's some possible being that, or at least he says it's not incoherent to suppose, right? Which is about as weak as you could get, to think that there's this metaphysically possible being who could override the laws of nature given the right circumstances. And that would have to be determinism is false, because you can't override the laws of nature when determinism is true. That's sort of like by definition of determinism. So you'd have to have these special metaphysical type beings with this narrow ability to override the laws of nature. If you plug that kind of being into a world where determinism is true, it's going to rob them of their wide ability. So they're not going to have free will. But pull them out of that kind of scenario, plug them into a world where indeterminism is true, of the right sort, and then this law overriding ability is going to be able to manifest, and they're going to be able to exercise free will. But that's not us, right? Because we're human. We're not like these Q continuum type beings or angels. Whether or not determinism is true or not, it doesn't affect our wide, it doesn't, that's not where the ability is breaking down. It's not at the wide ability level. It's at the narrow ability level, because humans aren't the kind of beings that could override the laws of nature, which is why Dirk says, determinism hurts us in one way and indeterminism hurts us in another way. Like, he doesn't allow that a normal human could exercise free will in any possible world. So it's this anthropocentric impossibilism, right? It's not a full-blooded Straussonian impossibilism. But it just seems like, well, that's a pretty bad result for hard incompatibilism, because it's not the determinism or indeterminism that keeps us from acting freely. It's our own it's a lack of a narrow ability that he thinks is required for free will. So I just think your distinction could be applied in that way to say something new about one of the biggest views out there. So I didn't know if that works in any way, but I just thought I'd float it by you if I had the chance.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Justin.
Oh, I don't get to hear whether you think it works. Oh no.
I'm sorry.
Well, I don't know. The answer is I don't know. I'm not sure if agent causation is intrinsic. It seems like it should be. I once wrote a bit that I've completely forgotten in my book about what agent causation really is. And of course, nobody who believes in agent causation, thought that was at all plausible. But I'm still baffled about agent causation.
Does
I thought from
did
reading
I say anything about your view that you would balk at and say, Oh, please don't say that about me.
No,
Okay.
you didn't. I think
That's a
yeah.
win for me then. Okay,
Okay.
thanks, Kadri.
Okay, Justin.
Okay. Hi, Kadri. I was flitting in and out of the talk to put down small children to bed, so I might have missed this, and so if I did, I apologize. But could you just clarify for me, at least in general, the sorts of things that need to get added to a narrow ability to give us the wide ability?
Okay, if we didn't have to worry about, I was torn. I have changed this several times. I used to have a sort of would counterfactual there as opposed to the would have a good enough chance. If I could just go with a simpler version, the would, then what would have to be added is just the truth of if I tried here and now to do this thing, I would succeed. Because that's the difference in that Frankfurt type case, or we had Beefy Bill's bad day. He's got these huge biceps. Spencer had these nice cases that made it really vivid how somebody could have the narrow ability. So normally he can do as many chin-ups as he likes. But this Frankfurt counterfactual intervener has come on the scene. And so long as he doesn't try to do them, he doesn't interfere. But if he tried to do them, the bully would instantly either shrink his biceps or somehow blow gusts of wind, preventing him from doing them. So in that scenario, Beefy Bill retains his narrow ability, which is here just the biceps, a few other things. But if he tried to exercise it, he would fail. So that's just the difference. He tried, he'd fail. Does that answer your question? You're muted.
And what about in cases where the agents can't even try?
Oh, well, that was my response there was just basically the analysis, which I think is new. I haven't seen it in the literature at all. It's a kind of backtracker. The form of the test is it's not the case that if you tried, you would first have to be different in some relevant way, e.g. be conscious, e.g. have a bigger brain, e.g. whatever. So that helps. But it's causally upstream, I think we want it to be from the trying, which gets at the intuition, that you can't do it because you can't try. Well, what's missing and what keeps it from being circular, I hope, is that's what's missing isn't a wide ability, it's a narrow ability. I have to have a principal distinction, though, between deep, narrow, and wide. And I haven't completely worked that out due to the fact that the clean distinction that I had, which had to do with how we acquire and lose abilities, didn't distinguish narrow from deep. So I really do need to do some more thinking there. But there is intuitively that difference. You fall asleep, you don't lose most of your abilities. You do lose your narrow abilities. You need consciousness to have most of your narrow abilities. And you need not to have a phobia, and you need to not have broken limbs and so on. Another intuitive way to put it, and this sort of came up in the original literature, David Lewis on dispositions and thinks, is that to have a narrow ability is to have all it takes, intrinsically speaking, to have the ability. You're not missing anything intrinsically. Of course, you're missing the desire. So the place for an incompatibilist to attack would be we're always missing something. We're always missing the desire, will, or intention which will lead us to try. But that leads to, well,
I had one other sort of clarificatory question, just out of curiosity. So which of the three types of abilities do I need on your view to be able to try to do something?
Good question. I was thinking narrow. I'm not totally sure. Well, actually, no, that's a really good question. Thank you. Normally, I would think it would be narrow,
Yeah.
not, well, narrow, of course, includes deep. You know, we'd have to, does it include deep? These are really hard and good questions. I don't know the answers to all of them. I mean, when you start to acquire a new ability in the sense of skill, at what point can you even try? You know, it's a bit of a fuzzy concept. But I do want to say, for instance, and that's why I can't just say it's narrow, that if you're on an airplane or you know, on a desert island with no bike, you can't even try to ride a bike. To try to ride a bike, you need to sort of be able to get on the bike and at least, you know, do the first things that would count as an attempt. So, yeah.
I see. Good. Any other questions? No? Okay, it's 9 o'clock on many of our ends, so that might be part of it. So, Kadri, thank you very much. We've never actually met in person, so this was the closest I'll probably get for some time. So I greatly appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And good luck with, I think you said this was going to be part of a new book project, so good luck with that too.
Anyone want to send me any comments? Very welcome.
Great, and
Thank you so much.
And if and hopefully I'll see the rest of you at the next iteration of the ARRG. Have a good evening, everybody.
Bye.
Have a
Thanks.
good night, Thomas. Thanks,
Yeah, you
Kadri.
too. Thank you.
Thank you.